So welcome, Nigel. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Nigel is the Vicar of Holy Trinity Church, and as of today, he's also the Archdeacon of Tauranga, or acting Archdeacon, given that the other two Archdeacons and the Bishop have all disappeared. So you're fully responsible, and we'll expect all sorts of excitement to happen in their absence. Nigel came here 2 years ago from Palmerston North. He's been in ministry, both Anglican and Pentecostal, for 26 years. He studied theology at Regent College in Vancouver, and he's authored a book called Villages Without Walls. And if we have a bit of time at the end, we might ask some questions about that. Nigel's worked for 7 years as full-time as leadership coach and leadership consultant, as well as having trained as a coach through City to City, which is the Tim Keller network supporting church planting initiatives. And I wouldn't be surprised if you hear more about that in the years ahead. So today, talking about how society has changed and how we might now respond, especially in regard to community, leadership, and communication. I heard Nigel speak on this towards the end of last year, and I personally found it extremely helpful. Plainly, our times are quite a different environment for ministry and for mission than what has gone before. And I think this seminar will help us to engage in where things are at now in a much better way. So, Nigel, over to you. I'll move this way just a little.
I might stand. I feel like I'm doing something if I stand. Hey, great to see you all. I notice Mike Brantley, you're here. Welcome. And just great to see you all. I'm amazed we got 27. That's incredible. So there mustn't be any football on tonight. This is probably a lifelong interest of mine. When I was at university, I did sociology and.
He's talking. And is he on mute?
Can I ask can I ask everybody? Jackie, do you want to mute everybody?
Again. Yeah.
Right, so where we go.
Apologies for silencing you all. So anyway, lifelong interest in culture, and particularly how it collides with scripture. And it's probably become more and more of an issue because the culture we face is way more complex than probably the kind of culture we might have experienced 20 or even 40 years ago, you know. So Eugene Peterson says a really interesting thing in his book, Long Obedience in the Same Direction. He said the world is an atmosphere. And it is, you know. When we lived in Canada, I became aware that our kids would probably achieve more academically and pursue success more than in New Zealand, where the culture is very much blend in, don't stand out too much. And just on that very obviously level, there is a different culture that we live in, and you have to kind of leave the country to feel it. And when you come back, you think, oh, this is who we are. And so there's good things about that, and there's negative things about that. What I want to do is talk about culture as it's shifted, you know, over the last 500 years. So this is just a vague overview. But I think the implications and understanding culture is really helpful, because we live and breathe and have our being in this culture. I'm through and through Kiwi in all its glory and dysfunction, because I'm formed here and I'm shaped here, and other people are shaped by other cultures. But there is a super culture as well. And I want to talk about a super culture that has sometimes an effect on us that we're unaware of. And I want to start by just doing a bit of a historic overview. And if you can't see this, this is pre-modern or traditional culture. And if you've travelled, you might have gone to the islands, like a village in Fiji, or a longhouse in Malaysia, or Marae here in New Zealand, where it's essentially a there are traditional values that shape it. And I want to suggest the three elements that shape a traditional society. One is that they share a big story that is communicated by a community into, and a part of the way of life is an authentic spirituality. Now, say you're at the campfire, you've got a family and an extended family, and you've probably known nothing but those people all your life. And through them, you're transmitted something that's your shared story. It's and it's the way of life you share through the spirituality that you have is, there'll be values that shape the way you live together. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a true spirituality, but what I'm saying is it's a spirituality that affects day-to-day life. And when I was, say, in Malaysia, the longhouses there, they shared a spirituality of animism. And so if something like superstitious happened, like a certain bird flew through the longhouse, they would disband the longhouse and go and build another one. And that's just the way their spirituality affected their lives day to day. And so these societies are really robust. Like you go back to, if you went into the highlands of PNG or something, you would discover a society that's running a lot like it used to, with maybe some European Western influence that's starting to permeate it. But anyway, a big shift happened in what's called the Enlightenment. And the big shift that happened in particularly Europe over this time, 16th, 17th century, particularly 16th century, is children had grown up in society, and as soon as they had language, they entered the workforce. And so they melded into a society and were shaped by an adult world from a very early age. And so that meant that change was less likely, okay? Very stable, because you didn't distance yourself from the society like happens in modernism. So the invention of the printing press in the 16th century caused quite a big change. And for the first time, middle-class families realised they needed to educate their kids. And so what is known as the modern childhood emerged. Now, nobody had a childhood essentially for the previous 1,500 years. As soon as you had language, you entered the adult world. And for the first time, children were separated from the adult world because they had to learn to read. They needed numeracy skills to be able to succeed in the emerging world that was beginning. And so, first of all, middle-class families did it, and we have the emergence of schools over this time. But imagine having grown up in an adult world and blended in with great difficulty as a kid. Imagine for the first time, this first generation of kids, where all the attention is on you. And it's the emergence of the modern self, as it's called, where children are told they can do something, they can be something, they can invent, they can create, they can do science, they can do colonising, they can make money. There's this emergence of a new middle class based on education, based on having dedicated time on them developing their egos. And these people who are shaped in this modern era as it's become known believed in a big story, and the big story was progress. So this generation went out and reshaped the world, often for worse, because they believed they could colonise, they could exploit resources, they could discover countries, they could do all these things rationally. They just knew things, and so they went out and also Christianised. But this was perpetuated by what's called the nuclear family. So community is no longer extended. In this period, people are moving to cities, they're leaving their extended family that were in villages, and they're going to the cities where there's education and opportunity. And so community gets reduced over the modern period for Western countries to the nuclear family. And what gets lost is an authentic spirituality. We end up with the emergence of the tokenistic view to religion, that religion has its place in the modern world, but it's private. Okay, so we end up with Sundays and churches Sundays. And because the Protestant church emerged in this printing press world, the Protestant church is especially guilty of being Sunday-centric. The Catholic Church not so affected, but it hasn't made our churches way less robust because we are emerging in this modern world. Now, the modern world, this belief in progress and industry and rationalism and I'll use a big word because the modern world is about control. The ability to control and make things happen. So it's a very linear, hierarchical world, a world of organisation and corporations and nation and governments, all that sort of stuff emerge over this time. And so the modern world, the business, and we out of the modern world, we end up with the mega church as well. It's a product of this control-orientated kind of modernism. But it marginalises faith and spirituality to Sunday. It has its place. And that is not in the centre of society, but on its margins. And so we've got this nuclear family that's emerged and sees its role to provide childhood. So, and out of childhood emerges the modern world. So I want to suggest the change that happens post-1960 is that the thinking of Nietzsche and others, this cynicism towards anything of belief and so on, starts to enter popular culture. And the main way it does this is through the breakdown of the family. So 1961% of marriages end in divorce. By the 1980s, it's 45%. But primarily the shift is a move to serial relationships and instability of relationships. Not just that marriage is fragile, but most things don't start with marriage now. The other thing that changes in childhood is that the nuclear family stops protecting children from the adult world. So previously, the bourgeois family was the childhood was dedicated to prepare them for the world. Now, in the postmodern world, we have the introduction of visual media. And so children can immediately access the adult world. There is no protection. And so this invades childhood. And so with the breakdown of family, kids now live to adult diaries. They go to childcare, they are picked up, taken away, or they go home and there's no parents there. Childhood is an experience of busyness and unsettledness, not stability like the modern world offered. But also you've got the invasion of the internet and kids being able to access adult secrets and no longer growing up as children, but growing up kind of scarred by their ability to see whatever they like. And so childhood is no longer a safe thing. And so with the breakdown of the family, which has like been a complete social catastrophe, which nobody mourns politically. It's really interesting that there is this sense in which kids need to actually create their community now because family isn't their community. It's not been there for them, and the Friends kind of program, you know, is all about that they've created a community. So there's a loss of family, which leads to a loss of a big story. So that belief in progress goes in the postmodern world. There is no longer a belief that there is meaning and purpose in the universe if you don't have a family that engenders it in you and passes on a belief in future. And we end up with also no spirituality. You have to make it up. You have to construct it to construct your own meaning and purpose. And so none of it is given. All of it has to be found. Now, the pre-modern world is very much shaped by the past. It's got deep roots in the past, and so therefore doesn't change. In the modern world, there's this movement towards future. And with a desire for to shape the future and create the future, pretty much all the modern thinking is around how do we create something bigger, better, stronger? How do we add value and so on? And I want to suggest that the church bought into that big time. We've modelled ourselves on corporations. We've modelled ourselves on successful business theory, or I call it B grade 1980s business theory. Anyway, so we've got that going on. The other thing that we have going on here is that the church was a key feature in progress and part of colonisation. And what happens is that we are inextricably linked with the modern world and criticised for being a part of it and not seen as culturally relevant anymore because we're part of the last epoch. That's why we're perceived. And so there is a unique criticism of Christianity as a religion and not of others, purely because we are guilty by association. We were part of colonisation. We have never dealt, never really seen it that way, but the rest of the world does in terms of postmodernism. Now, what I want to highlight about postmodern culture is it is a culture of grief and loss. Zygmunt Bauman calls the modern world just a solid modernity, and he calls postmodern world liquid modernity, where hardware, hierarchy feature these things. Now, postmodern world, everything is fluid, everything is unstable, everything is constructed, and so we end up with he calls it liquid love, where love is an episode, two years maybe, and then we'll rethink it. And so everything is temporary, so therefore everything is anxious. When's it going to go? Am I going to lose this as well? And so anxiety becomes a key feature of a postmodern world where there isn't a stable family to give you a purpose and meaning. And there isn't a spirituality to tell you how to live. So you're making it up as you go along. Now, a big story gives hope. A community imbues you with love so that you find belonging. And authentic spirituality gives you faith to live by it. Now, these are the things, Paul says kind of last forever. And these are the very things, this essential human DNA is the very thing that the postmodern world does not give people. So people have to live their lives, but they do not have the core stuff to be able to flourish. Now, this becomes our profound challenge, because I want to suggest that most churches have been shaped by the modern world. And so we just think, we just have to give people purpose, and we have to, give them the message. And modernism is deeply linked to truth and reading and highlighting the point of everything. And you want to go to heaven because that's about future. And a postmodern will just say, I'm not even coping with being alive. Why would I be interested in heaven? There isn't a belief in that kind of future. They are really struggling in the realm of how do I live? How do I survive? And how do I handle my crappy life that has been handed to me with no resource to know how to live it? I want to suggest that the church has to basically be about these commodities. I'll call them commodities, but they are the personhood of Jesus. If we are not a place of belonging and love, the safest place in the universe, the church has no future. And we've been through doctrinal wars because modernism is about being right and everyone else wrong. But actually, in a postmodern world, the church has to be the safest place in the universe, where people can belong in all their complex mess, and there is grace for them to change, and there is grace for us to handle these broken children. So first of all, we have to be a community of love. Secondly, if I draw a diagram, I always do 3 circles. Community is the first one. And so I want to suggest love is the building of community for the sake of the world. So it's easy to belong to, and I use the term village without walls. It's easy to get into. It's not obstructive in terms of behaviour, or looks or whatever. Secondly, faith. We have to have a model of discipleship and formation because people are broken. And this need to return to the basics, that we're actually calling people to follow Jesus and actually giving them rhythms that form them. Rhythms of prayer, rhythms of reading scripture, rhythms of mentoring and so on, so that they can change. And, our belief in a Sunday kind of centered worship is not going to make it in the next season because it's not enough. Last thing is hope, and that's the buying to a mission, the mission of God, finding meaning and purpose, that there is actually a point to this, and there is a God whose fingerprints are in the universe and are in this community, and he's shaping us for a mission. So there's a whole lot of stuff there, but I'm happy to talk and process it with you. I forgot to say that the postmodern world is about the now. You'll notice that postmoderns really probably won't think about buying a house. They're more likely to buy a scooter, because if there's no future, why make costly decisions? You just live in the now, and I don't think most postmoderns want to live in the now. They want something else, but they don't know how to access that. And I think the church is the only answer to this. I totally believe in church as God's intervention. But unfortunately, we've got stuck here. The modern world has been a massive imprint on the church. And it's made us incredibly dysfunctional to navigate this, because a postmodern wants to destroy this, as we're seeing with the anti-colonial stuff and a lot of the gender stuff. It is attacking this control hierarchy, and the postmodern really wants to be free, but it's in a very dysfunctional way. And so really happy to talk this through if it can be of help. So I'm kind of done, and I'll turn it over to Paul to take charge, and we'll go from there. So I hope it'll make sense, people.
Well, I kind of wish we were in a more conversational space, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who've got things that they'd like to ask and say and respond. So I'm going to make a start on that on behalf of all of us, and ask you to have an engagement with your chat. Put into chat the things you might want to be saying or talking to Nigel right now. So my question is, how do you begin? I mean, the comedy here is that you have come into the biggest building in New Zealand, a 900-seater auditorium church. Okay,
it's a modern construct.
It's a modern construct. That's right, modernist construct. And I've been in a lot of churches over the last year, with extraordinary variation. And while there are some congregations that are really thriving, by and large, they're in buildings which they can no longer afford, and they have got congregations that are either elderly or unwell, and they don't have the resources. They're sort of stuck with the residue of that. How do you make a start?
I mean, I come to the Anglican Church late, so one of the ironies I find is that most Anglicans hate their buildings. And I think the buildings are the best thing we've got, mainly because Anglican buildings are architectural and they have atmosphere. And the modern world's produced the warehouse church. You know, the mere church, and to some extent our church is one of those. where it's quite a sterile space and everything is about lights and smoke machines and motivational speak. Okay, so I think that's problematic for a postmodern that wants to feel rooted in the past, because what they don't have in this now experience is something that feels like it's going to be there for them in the future. It was interesting. I was talking to a girl. She's about 30 tonight, and she said most of my friends are looking for something that they feel they will be there for them. And she'd come from a Pentecostal church, and she said, you know, they don't really believe that's going to be there in the future. And it's a really interesting observation. So yes, buildings are expensive. I think the thing that we have to do, and the thing that I've tried to work hard to do, is it has to feel like a community space. So we've done a lot of work making our foyer less sterile, so it's more cafe-ish. I always speak from the floor rather than from the stage, so I've tried to close the gap. So when you're starting in the space, you've got to win the community battle, because then you can do the discipleship mission stuff. You don't win the community battle and create a communal sense that this is welcoming and hospitable. So that's around food, it's around being welcoming and not having exclusive conversations. You know, Anglicans are by and large introverts, so they're really good at not talking to people. And you've got to build a culture of welcome. So the first thing you have to do as the leader is be the friendliest person in the universe. You have to model the revolution, because postmoderns are acutely sensitive to human dynamics because they've been busted. Okay, so busted emotionally, broken families and so on. So the thing I think is there's this really weird tension where there's this deep history and sometimes buildings that don't work because of pews and all sorts of dynamics, which is problematic. So you have to modernise the building enough so so it works for community, but you don't want to lose the ambience that gives the sense of the holy, that there's a holy God here. And I think that tension is the dance that we have to do. And if a church won't change its building to work for community, I think by and large it will struggle to survive. But that said, if you can do the dance and use your building in a very atmospheric way, so long as it's welcoming, I think you can flourish. But it is a lot on what the leader models in terms of welcome, hospitality, and getting the church on that journey. If you don't win this community battle, you aren't doing any mission, you know, because nobody want to stay when they come. And I might be sounding like Sunday, but I'm talking the whole week, you know, because churches have got to be social hubs. So, yeah.
So I'm going to ask, how do you, fully with you on building community, how do you then transition to discipleship, given that we are used to a programmed instinct towards delivering discipleship programs and all of that? What's the change dynamic that actually builds discipleship? Is it a different type of community? How do you deliver it?
Well, if you do community well, relationships will form that hopefully involve mentoring and common journey. I mean, most discipleship is informal, and it's not about content, it's about being seen and believed in. And, you know, when Jesus disciples the disciples, he sees them and calls them, and they get to be with him. So I think that's a key part of discipleship that we neglected. And like, we're doing leadership development once a month. We've got small groups and stuff. I don't expect small groups to produce disciples, but as people become participators and start to find who they are, then you start to see people come alive. And I think you can only create these little fish pools for disciples and hopefully places of belonging. But as people find that they fit and belong hopes start to bubble up. And I think it's up to us to see people most of all and help people discover who they are. And I think that's the greatest privilege of being a leader, but it means you've got to be a mum and a dad, because, you know, that's, I think the way I most understand my role is to do that, but also help other people become that to a younger generation. But it's not straightforward. It's but I think the relational dynamics of discipleship are the most important. I think content is secondary, but we can add layers of content and learning, because we want a learning community like the home group I lead, which is all our kind of singles and married without kids. We're doing the Trinity at the moment. They wanted to do theology, you know, so that you can do good stuff, but it's a community now, you know.
So it's not an exact correlation, but the whole thing of behave, believe, belong, which slightly correlates with that. What you're saying is the discipleship model is more about mentoring than teaching content. It's a spiritual parenting from people who are actually living out their own discipleship in an authentic way.
Yeah, I mean, you're actually teaching a person how to live.
Yeah.
You know, and so Tom Sines said, you know, if you really want to create the future, reparenting is where it's at. You know, so I think that's a part of it. But obviously, you want people to learn the faith. But often, for a postmodern, like I come through the modern world, so it's informational. You know, and even the way I'm doing this as modernist, and that's my reality. But I've got a real sensibility towards what postmoderns need. But you know, the postmodern will learn off you if you give them time, because that's what they feel that they haven't had. And that's the challenge for us, because we actually, most of us work in offices, we do crap that really doesn't create the future because we're busy with admin or whatever. And I think it'd be really interesting if you looked at your diary and thought, okay, was half my time this week on people? You know, I try to do at least half my time seeing people in a week, which as an introvert has its challenges, but I don't think there is any choice. So yeah, it's all about prioritizing people, you know, and that is fun. It's great. It's messy.
So I'm going to give Zala a heads up. I'll come to you after this next question, which is, how does mission fit in? Because I think in this modernist perspective, it's like it comes late to the party. It's something we add on when we're feeling we've got a good community and people have grown as Christians and they're discipleship a long time. Is that okay? Now it's time to do mission. But I have a sense that this is going to be coming much earlier in the package than in a modern environment.
Well, I mean, everything you're doing is for mission. Like you build a community, because that's the most missional thing we can do. You know, I'm a fan of Stanley Howard, and in Resonatians, he says the best thing that we can do for the world is show them and offer them a living, breathing community of faith. You know, because all of us became Christians because we're exposed to Christianity, not because we heard Christianity. We got exposed to it, and it was authentic enough to convince us. And my parents did that to me. I didn't give in to them. I responded to an evangelist, but that exposure. So I think the challenge is how do we make something that it impacts people. So Jackie is over here, she runs our building. My hope is that it was really interesting. We have had a Tauranga kind of thing happening, and people were making coffee for the mums, and the kids were playing, and they didn't really want to leave. And so now they use our building regularly for their family stuff. But it was purely because they felt community here, and it was just like they wanted to stay. And I think that's that whole thing of safety and welcome and stuff. I think it's the most missional thing we can be. But the other thing is is knowing this, we have to think through what is our community footprint. So for us, we've got this building in the middle of the city that is a great resource, so we can do stuff. But for us, I think our biggest opportunity is our lawn out front. And part of what do mission, I think, today is what the Catholics have understood for many years, is that private space is private space, but what happens in public is impacting. So how to do Christmas Eve outside, how to do a whole lot of social offerings that are an offering of welcome to the city, so that you break out of private space. But you've obviously got to give people confidence that they have a big story and they want to live out of it, and that they'll do that in the workplace. So part of it is equipping people to be neighbours, to be voices. You know, you have to do those things. But the thing that changes things, I think, is a community that is living a life together that's worth entering. For postmodern, that's deeply attractive. For a modernist, it's optional.
So, have we got any interesting questions?
We've got interesting questions. There seems to be three themes. One is asking to comment about comparison to Islam. I can read you that question. Another one is asking about, where is the Jesus story? Where does it connect? And some comments on that. And another one is, how do we do it? Where do you want to start? I can ask the questions are more detailed than what I'm saying.
I'll
start with this one. Hi, Nigel. Is there a Jesus story that connects well with the postmodern mindset you describe? If you consider the issues of guilt, shame, significance, loneliness, alienation, what would you relate most to postmodern culture?
I mean, I spend a lot of time in Genesis 1, 2, and 3.
We didn't expect you to go there.
I just think origins really matter, and understanding the dignity of being human and how the dignity of being human is being lost. And juxtaposing that with what Jesus did in forming an alternative community that gave people their lives back and gave purpose and hope. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of Jesus stories you can draw from. I think it's Mike's put up the prodigal son, which is obviously a beautiful one, because most postmoderns feel grimy. They feel like the world slimed them and they don't know how to be clean again. So the fatherhood image, the prodigal son is a great one. But I've ended up spending a lot of time in the Old Testament lately because it's so human. And probably my favourite stories are around Jacob, who is a classic postmodern who wrestles with everybody, fights with everybody, and doesn't know how to lose well. I quite like doing that stuff. That kind of keeps it human rather than being esoteric theology. I used to do a lot of Paul, and I bring him in, but I'm doing it on the back of more narrative theology. I think the story is big, and people getting the Jesus story and what Jesus is doing. It's we call this going around the square. I'm running the room here.
Are we going through Reformation?
Oh yeah, you have to.
I had a question here too.
You have to think of the church as in a more pre-modern way, because that is a sustainable society. If we don't do faith, hope, and love, if we don't do these things, we won't exist. The Wellington Diocese is big on this model of he kind of proclaimed his message, and then he invited the disciples to be with him. And so in Mark 3:13, he calls the disciples to be with him, and I'm trying to remember what comes next. My brain's gone blank. Last one's commissioning. Do it. They start to do. And then he commissions them. And all the Gospels ends with a commissioning, with a sense of mission. And this is this, you know, it's Jesus' way, it's Jesus' discipleship model, or we respond to proclamation or knowing something of the gospel. And then we get to be. And then Jesus starts to let them do stuff and give them feedback, but ultimately he lets them loose. Now, unfortunately, the modern church has skipped this one and gone from, you know about Jesus, now do something about it. You know, you should tell all your friends, which is a quick way to losing your friends because you're not ready to tell your friends. You don't know how. But we move from here to here and we're not very good at what is the most transformational step for people. So yeah, if we're going to, I think that's kind of summarized the Jesus story really well in terms of how Jesus did church with his community. And I think what we're called to do as leaders in the church today. And I like the way it's moving around there. Thank you, Jack.
We're back.
Can I make a couple of comments which are kind of on the same line as you've been speaking, Nigel? One was Jesus was a storyteller, not a theologian. It's Fraser and Michael say running father, aka prodigal rich young ruler. Yeah. But those are kind of affirming. Sounds very much like there's a need to be much more involved. So how do we take our current congregation with us in this move? What's needed? We are busy. Another question. Where do we start, basically? How do we do it?
I'm amazed how busy we are with often things that aren't fruitful. So I think, assess busy. And whether, I think I'd say is, you've got to like your life. And if you don't like your life and you don't like the way your job is, change it. I really like I like what I do. And I think a lot of us are martyrs. We are doing a lot of the things that we don't believe in, or we've got stuck in kind of grids that need reevaluation. And I think thinking through church being a fun place to be as opposed to a sterile place to be. When I took over leading Pentecostal church, which was very functional, getting people up on as many alcohols as possible, even if they were the same people, that was a success. I remember kind of working on this community stuff because, the church had been stuck at about 200 for years. And we started to eat together and we did a camp. And we had spit like roast and all that sort of stuff. And I was sitting around there thinking, this is what I want my kids to grow up in. This is exactly what I want to be a part of. It just felt like it was a slice of heaven. And we kind of became that slowly. We became a real community and we just took off. We went to about 700 in 4 years. And it wasn't because it was clever, it was because it was simple. And, unfortunately, when you grow, and I've kind of this is a modern thing, when you hit 500, you become a management exercise. So I already told the church, once we hit 300, we're planning a new community because I really don't want to lead a big church again because they don't work. So you have to, there's this threshold. So if the church is too big and you're busy because of that, then start something else. Now, if your church is small and you're busy, you're really in trouble because it should be easy unless you're trying to be a big church and you should just be a family. So, I really want to encourage you to think about what you do, because if it doesn't build community, it's not going to take you anywhere. You're just going to be stuck because people smell community and want to be a part of it. And so if you're too busy to do that stuff, eat together, hang out, the amount of leaders that don't actually seem to like being with their people and they're too busy, that's not leadership, that's abdication. And, this is a people ministry, so look at your diary and be honest about it and figure out how to create context that you love and find joy and fun in, and think about that, because this role is meant to be joy giving, and you know, I don't do it for the money, nor do you, so I do it for fun.
I think this diagram is quite significant. It's so true that we've gone from knowing to doing, and we've missed out to being, really, in terms of the professionalisation of the church. Yeah.
I think they have been saying everyone's busy, not necessarily on church things, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm assuming I'm talking to people who are leading, so
Yeah.
So sorry if you're not, you're off the hook.
What would you say about Anglicanism's monastic heritage? Example, liturgy and pretending clergy are monks, etc. The whole monastic movement. That's not my question.
You know,
it's on the sunny south, that one.
so you know, I'm an Anglican because of Bishop Justin, because I ended up in his team before I was an Anglican, and I found him bewildering because he was kind of a neo-monastic kind of guy, social justice, totally different origin from me, but I deeply value his friendship because I think he's the finest leader I've worked with, and I kind of came into liturgy in the diet leadership team, really. We've been dabbling in All Saints and Palmy, and I wasn't really sure what it was at that point. It was trying to be a vineyard church, and really, I think, I'm not sure. But anyway, so liturgy was unfamiliar, and then I'm in this dio team and they're doing liturgy every time we meet, and I'm just bored out of my mind. And but it slowly became authentic as I understood the rhythm of it, and there was also freedom alongside it. Justin's monastery at Nadiawa really was the spiritual epicenter of the diocese, where most of the leaders would go and do stuff and pray and so on. And I came to really respect that. And so, you know, we're still trying to get our prayer rhythm going here. It's not what I want it to be. But rhythms of prayer, I think discipleship is a lot about teaching people the habits of the faith. And when you're a chaotic postmodern, habits matter. And when I was doing leadership coaching, one of the guys I coached was one of the top advertising guys in New Zealand. He worked with the All Blacks, he worked with everybody, and he's a Buddhist. Anyway, he's in burnout anyway, and he's kind of doing his Buddhist thing. And I gave him some Richard Rohr to read, and I felt like he was the right transitional voice for Hayden, and it was really interesting because he wasn't really looking for Christianity. He was just looking to survive his crazy life. And he said to me after reading it, he said, I wish I'd come across this earlier. He said, when I was looking for something, I was looking for a practice. I knew my life was chaotic and I wanted a practice. And he said, all the Christians just tried to sell me a ticket to heaven. And he said, I didn't want to go to heaven. I needed something to bring me peace in this world. And so Buddhism offered me a practice. And he said, Christianity never offered me anything like that. And that got me thinking a lot. And I think coming out of a Pentecostal background where there is no practice, it's just yabba dabba do, and let's go for it, let's break through all the time, and it's relentless. It's not a sustainable spirituality, and it's not a spirituality you can live on Wednesday in a dark experience. And you know, Hayden really challenged me that we provide people with practices. So I think liturgy is great for that. I think the monastic kind of traditions, especially the Celtic ones, when I was in depression, Celtic liturgy saved my life. And I kind of was open to what happened with Anglicanism because of that Celtic daily prayer. But yeah, I think we've got gold we don't realise it's gold, you know, and I think there is way more openness to Anglican traditions and the spiritual disciplines than ever before. Like, I know a bunch of young leaders who went to John Marcoma to get told to read the Anglican prayer book. They went all the way to America for that. Interestingly, they bring him back here next year and he's going to be doing everything on spiritual disciplines. Why? Because chaotic postmoderns want solid. They want what Eugene Peterson calls they want the Jesus way. They want a way. Eugene in that book says, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And we, as evangelicals, have highlighted truth, as Pentecostals, life, but actually, first and foremost, Jesus is a way. And I think the monastic really wrestles with that, and I think it's crucial for our future.
And I think we've got time for either one or two.
One comment and a question, which the last one you might want to go somewhere else afterwards. Just a comment. Jesus did correct bad theology. It did matter to him. That was a comment. But going back to the question right at the beginning, in what way has Islam's colonizing of the pre-modern, modern postmodern world avoided the same stigmatization of culture that Christianity has received? What are the implications of faith in this dichotomy? Is there any room for dogmatism in community relationships?
Oh.
Is that enough for you?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good one. Islam is a really interesting thing because it is pre-modern. It's a warrior religion, but it is about control, and so it's got I think it's got a slight modernist control thing, but it's rooted in its pre-modern story. Islam has really resisted Western modernization and modernism, and quite steadfastly been probably a voice against it, in spite of being mired in it in the modern economy, which is its deep irony. But traditional Islam has really done that, and it's deeply communal. If you go into an environment, it's a rhythm of prayer. And it's very communal if you're a guy anyway. I don't know, it's resolutely about a pre-modern truth that and I'm not an expert on Islam, but a friend of mine is, and Tom Holland says some very interesting things about Muhammad and Islam, but we won't go into those today. But it's I think it's been more robust because of its pre-modern flavour, and that it feels more primal than a modernised Christianity does, which is intellectualising. Yeah, it's more communal. It's got those roots in the pre-modern world, which make it lasting, and mostly Muslims, wherever they've gone, they've constructed a pre-modern form of community to sustain their faith. It's an interesting kind of element, and I don't know enough about. I've been around South Carolina and a few other places that are Islamic, but our big challenge, I think, is like the vacuity of our spirituality, and what we ask of people is so different to what Islam asks of them, and there is no communal kind of element to our faith. It's such an individualistic thing as it's been shaped by modernism, and I think that nominal individualism, nominal Christianity is the big challenge for us, breaking out of individualism, and that is inexcusable for the church that we brought into that.
Do you think there is a degree to which what we used to call nominals are actually inoculated against returning into Christianity, or they actually represent an available people group?
I think we're in this next season where if we don't see a returning of those people, it will be tragic. I think that's an easy thing to see happen, right? But not in a modernistic form of faith. People are after something communally authentic, and that's the postmodern world. They're after authentic, So I mean, we here are seeing people return to church that have been out of church a long time. That's been probably our biggest growth area. And it's not hard, but it does involve us having to be really relationally connected.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, Nigel. Going to bring it to an end there. I'm hoping that that's actually left many questions in your heart and mind. I hope it's not been too challenging. I actually found it a wonderfully revelatory sort of framework for what I've experienced in my 42 years of ministry. I'm not ashamed to say that I actually stood down from being regional dean late towards retirement, simply because I didn't find that I had the solutions going ahead. The solutions that were in my head were the postmodern things that worked 30 years ago. So I have found this analysis actually really helpful, particularly the emphasis on community and on being an authentic community with them. So thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Jackie, for running the cameras. Thank you, Dale, for running the chat. And thank you all for tuning in. Now, before you go, I've got two notices, otherwise it wouldn't be churchy, would it? There's a convocation coming up, Community St. Mark's convocation in November. If you're in an ACM parish, you will in fact be represented through your parish. But if you're an individual member who's not in an ACM parish, which is quite a few, then you should have received an email from me recently about being represented at convocation, either from South Island or Lower North Island or the Upper North Island. If you didn't get that and you're not in a parish, then please contact me. And we would like representation. Don't at all feel shy about putting your hand up and saying you would like to be part of that group. And if I were to say our next seminar, which will be more a panel style with an international group of panel members, will be held on Wednesday, 4th of October at 7 o'clock. Again, what might God be doing today? What is this season that we are in right now before God? So may God be with you and bless you all. In our work with the community, St. Mark, we know where we've come from. Going ahead, we see the work of rejuvenation of church as our mission, as our priority. That's where our heart is. That's what we're going to be building into. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.